Welcome back to Navigating the Work Compass. You're here with Kate Luzio, founder and CEO of Luminary, and my co-host, Susan Chapman Hughes. And we have, as mentioned on last week's episode, an incredible guest today joining us, Sam Hammock, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Verizon. And we're going to have a phenomenal conversation with Sam. But before we do that, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge the terrible and senseless shootings that occurred yesterday in Uvalde, Texas at Robb Elementary School. Also, the church shootings that happened last week in California. And prior, as many of you know who listened to last week's episode, as Susan and I talked about the senseless shootings at a grocery store in Buffalo. And as we were prepping for this, Sam reminded me that today is the hard to believe 2-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. Our condolences for all of these shootings and senseless acts on humankind, and certainly to the Black community who have continued to see racist acts of violence, terror, plague them, even in the 2 years that George Floyd was murdered. So wanted to recognize and acknowledge, and for many of you that listen to the show, as both leaders, managers, but also as just employees, if you haven't checked in on your teams, now is the time. Right. Whether they are from the Black community, whether they are working parents that are dealing with as they watch their kids go to school this morning. It is time. But we have one of the most thoughtful leaders in I would say, in the human space that I've gotten to know over the past year. As I mentioned, Sam Hammock, who's the CHRO of Verizon, who is really leading with purpose and leading with empathy and authenticity. And it's something, Sam, that Susan and I literally talk about each week. So we're excited to have you here today.
Yeah. Welcome, Pam. It's great to see you.
You too.
All right. So we'll get right into, and Sam, you have had such a fantastic career from E&Y, JP Morgan, American Express. You landed at Verizon little over, I think it was a year and a half ago. Is that right? Okay. A few months into that, you get the opportunity to interview and be on that slate for the CHRO, for the former CHRO had left, Christy, who was a great friend for both of us, and was on the show as well. So can you talk a little bit just around, you joined in the midst of a pandemic, remotely, hadn't met many of your colleagues, bosses, et cetera, in person, and then literally are kind of catapulted in a good way into running human resources for a massive organization when the CHRO role over the last 2 years has dramatically changed. Yeah. How has that experience been for you? And just I'll also add, our listeners love advice. So as we're thinking about, and Susan and I will kind of ping pong around that, is, what have you learned throughout this time as a leader?
Yeah, it's we would need a lot more than 30 minutes. What have you learned, right? Well, what have you learned in that? And I think the number one thing I would say, to quote the ever powerful Beyonce, I'm not a gambling person, but if there's one thing I'm going to bet on, it's myself. And I would give that advice to anybody, because for lots of reasons. Listen, to your point, I joined Verizon in December 2020. I worked for 8 months as the head of all of global talent for Verizon, which was an amazing job in and of itself, with never meeting a soul in person. I did an interview in person. It was during the pandemic, and for lots of reasons, it was crazy to make the leap anyway, but it was amazing. What it taught me, though, was we absolutely can connect without it. It takes a lot of purpose, and it takes a ridiculous amount of work and intention, but it does not mean there's no connection. It does
Right.
not mean it does not mean you can't understand what a culture is like, and that you can't build a really powerful and meaningful network. And so my first advice is, do not let that stand in your way. That
Mm.
is a horrible excuse, that because you can't be with people that you can't build your network and make a meaningful connection. So that is one, and I absolutely was purposeful about doing that over my first 8 months. And I think that's what opened the door to even be
Mm.
included in the slate. By the
Yeah.
way, I was invited to the slate without meeting any of those people.
Right. I mean, that's amazing, right?
Right?
You said something, Sam, when you quoted Beyonce around betting on yourself, but that takes a lot of self-confidence. And I think a lot of people have taken a beating. Their self-confidence has taken a beating over the last, couple of years in particular. And, as I think about diverse populations and the things that people are struggling with and trying to show up at work and be, ready to rock and roll, like you sometimes might start to question yourself. So I'd love to just like get your perspective on like, how do you get yourself up for it? So you say, yeah, I'm going to bet on myself, but how do you like do things that build confidence for yourself, especially for women? Because
Mm.
Lord knows women have like really taken some big self-confidence beatings over the last couple of years with COVID. How do you think
Yeah.
about that?
It's so funny, Susan. I was having this conversation with a cohort of working women yesterday, and we were talking about this, particularly like, how do you bet on yourself? And something that was coming up really common was working women, specifically over COVID, saying, I actually realized during COVID what I wasn't willing to sacrifice. And I didn't realize that before. I was used to being the last mom at after school pickup, right? I was used to saying, no, I couldn't do certain things. I couldn't go see my family. And I realized how much I was sacrificing, and I'm not willing to anymore. What worried me in the talk track was then saying, so now I have to turn down a lot of job opportunities.
Mm.
Hmm.
And now I feel like I have to back off of my career because I don't want to sacrifice that. What I would say, and kind of how I've approached that, and I have a second grader at home too, so I have young kids. So that conversation hits real. I also realized that. But for me, it was like, but why not me? Right? So
Yeah.
to have that confidence, I think I can do it just as good as somebody else.
Yeah.
I think that I bring something to the role, and I also have been really intentional about my own boundaries
Mm.
and where they have to flex at times. And I'm a
Yeah.
big believer, like, you can have everything, but you can't have everything all at once.
That's
And
right.
so life is full of choices, but I'm willing to make those choices and do it in a way that still reflects my own values and purposes. And I think that self definition and self awareness is really important to build that confidence.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, Sam, that I saw from from sort of from the outside and having the opportunity and privilege to work with Verizon through the Luminary partnership was very early on in the pandemic, and I can imagine when you took on the role as that global head of talent was really listening to employees. Right. And Susan and I talk about this literally every week. All right. Are you listening to your employees around what does it look like for a return to the office or hybrid or remote or flexibility? And, just listening to those employees. How is Verizon, from a cultural standpoint, really implementing this? Because it's one thing to say it at your level and Hans and sort of that leadership team, but then it's another thing in such a large organization to sort of really bring that down through the pipeline.
Yeah, I could not agree more about the listening. I
Yeah.
actually think corporate America has got away from that a lot in the last few years, not just from the pandemic. Let's be real; it's been
Mm-hmm.
before then. And like I said to you, I was talking to a cohort of women yesterday. I have a rule that I have to do roundtables with focus groups 3 to 4 a week minimum, no matter where I'm at in the world. And it's not just from with my organization. I mean, I'm in HR, so luckily my role is to listen to all of the voices of our
Yeah.
employees. And so I do them globally at all levels in different groups, and I mix them up. And hearing that, it's funny you talk about. We're hearing a lot about the word flexibility,
Mm-hmm.
right, and what people are going to demand. Listen, if we're listening to the people at the top of the house on what the future workforce is going to want in that space, I promise you we're going to fail.
Yeah.
The people to listen to is those that are now entering the workforce, because they are going to shape it. And labor is in a brilliant place of power right now.
Yes.
And we will lose them before they even really get started if we aren't careful and hear what's going on in their minds. And I'm not really bought into the talk track of if you don't ever work in an office, you'll never feel the culture of a company. I don't really get behind that a ton.
I'd love, Sam, it's so interesting. I was at a board directors dinner a few months ago, and there was this very robust conversation about what young people want. And it was almost like this old school, new school conversation where like these older directors were like, no, they want to come to the office because that's the only way they get FaceTime with their bosses. And that's the only thing that they're going to be able to, connect to in order to give them the opportunity to grow in their careers. And I was like, I don't really think you have any clue as to like what these young people were thinking about, or even middle-aged people who've gone through, the traumatic experiences. I'd love to just, you're having these listening sessions. What are you hearing from people in terms of the kind of workplace that they expect and, the kind of working situation that they are looking for that will make them feel good about the companies they're working for?
Yeah. The number one thing that I hear in these listening tours that I'm doing is, one, trust. Trust me that I know how to do my job, that I am here to deliver and be successful for this company. It's in everyone's best interest, and that I'm going to get it done. So trust me no matter where I'm sitting. Because by the way, I just showed you for 2 years that we can. So a lot of trust is what I'm hearing in the talk track. The second is choice. I'm hearing a ton of talk around choice. And this is my preferred word over flexibility, by the way. And more options is, I think, as employers, the more choice we empower our employees to have, this could be like choice of schedule, choice of where they work, choice of when they work, even choice in total rewards. I've been having tons of conversations like what makes people sticky. And so that's what I'm hearing a huge talk track around is, and it's not that, Susan, to your point of there's a little old school, new school kind of friction happening. I think there is. I also think it's like just step back, because sometimes we're actually saying the same thing, we're just defining it differently. Meaning, does that moment with your boss matter, and you actually do want to know when they're in a person because you would love to have that? Yeah, sure. But guess what? That might be once a month.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's going to be enough for them.
Right.
And so does that mean that I have to work where you are? It's near the office? No, not necessarily. And they can still kind of find that connection.
What I want to build on that, because I think there's also a lot out there, and I would love your personal experience. So is culture, right? Especially if you're new in the organization, regardless of your level, right? You're new in an industry, you're new in an organization. You switched not only industries, but massive organizations with lots of stakeholders, et cetera. How did you look at culture? And American Express is a very strong culture as you got into Verizon. But more importantly, from a company standpoint, you're remote. You've not met anyone. You don't know your team as far as meeting it face to face. How did that cultural sort of integration happen? Because again, Sam, I'm my own opinion. You had never met anyone, and yet you were still considered for the candidates for the CHRO role, which you ended up getting.
Yeah. In many ways, on paper, I wasn't the most ready for the role. Like, let me be blunt and say it, right? So I think that if you think about culture, and this is something I think companies, it will behoove them, like we've really got to get on board and how we approach this for the future. Having an omni-channel approach to how we communicate and engage with employees is going to, in my opinion, is going to be a huge key to the answer. So one of the things that Verizon has been doing is they have this thing called Up to Speed. 3 times a week, there is a live, and it's published externally as well on Twitter and internal channels, where there's a 30-minute session at lunchtime every 3 times a week. And it's whatever's going live. Like, in fact, I did it today. And I talked about the tragic events that have been happening to all employees. And those are ways that you get a feel for a culture of a company. What are they talking about? What is the tone? How do I feel after it? And there's so many channels that we have to leverage to bring culture in, to make people feel that sense of belonging. which I can't say enough about a sense of belonging in a culture. And you get a feel for that. You don't have to walk into the building, but don't get me wrong. Walking into a building is needed at times. It's just needed in a different way. And I think we've realized that.
And so, Sam, you and I both know a lot of very, I would call inflexible leaders who it's like my way or the highway. And, clearly, at least my perspective is the future is that's not going to be the way you're going to win and grow people, get people to buy in. But you do have this cultural thing right now, particularly in like financial services and other industries where it's like, well, this is just the way we do things. And so we want to get back to that. So what kind of advice would you give to those leaders? And in particular, like what kind of things should they be doing to help change their perspective and kind of get out of their, what I call old school ways?
Yeah. Well, listen, if they don't get out of their old school ways, I think it's going to be really tough to attract and retain talent, first of all.
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So, listen, if you look at, no matter what research and data you want to look at, we're still sitting in levels of unseen high attrition across all industries and corporations, right? So if you look at any report, what are some of the top 5 reasons that you see? Pay is actually not number one consistently on any of those. It's usually like number 3.
Right.
It's usually number 3. But guess what else is now popping up in those top 5? It's leadership, right? I promise, I say this all the time, but like really great leadership won't keep everyone. It's not going to keep everyone, but it will sure as hell make people leave faster.
Yeah.
If you don't have it.
Oh, yeah.
Have it. So when you say, Susan, we know some of those unflexible leaders, they're everywhere. We anybody listening probably knows some of them as well. What we're seeing on that list of 5 certainly is location and work-life flexibility. And people want this ability. People are not afraid of hard work. They're not afraid to continue to work 50, 60 hours a week. That's not the talk track, but leaders are confusing that with the talk track. The talk track is, let me be the adult that I am and manage those hours in the schedule and my workload, and I promise I will deliver. But that might mean I want to take off from 3 to 5, right? And then I don't work during those hours, and I'm going to work later at night. And I think we're going to have to step back. What I'm seeing happen is almost like cannibalization within that group to say, I'm going to post for jobs. I don't want to leave the company. We're seeing this. I don't want to leave the company, but I actually don't want to work in this team. And so you're seeing people leave out. You're seeing them have a hard time creating the right funnel of talent that wants to come and work for that particular leader and team. And listen, that's not new news, right? The topic might be new, but you see that all the time with inflexible leaders.
I'm seeing that from the companies that we work with at Luminary, financial services, tech, media, the internal cannibalization is really massive because everyone has open roles. And when there is a good leader that is open and is flexible, that reputation now I think is like wildfire versus what it was before. And so this idea of choice and options, I love that you said choice versus flexibility. One kind of anecdotal example, this was in financial services. The current team that this person was on was this working mother wanted to come in at 10, by the way, was willing to come in every day and work 10 to 3, and then so that she could drop off and pick up, had no childcare, and then would work again, obviously, and log in at night, but would come in every day. And the manager said no. And then so heard that another area was hiring, and that was an easy yes. And what's even more sad is that the manager actually called the existing manager and said, I just don't think this is right with our culture to be able to do this. And if she does it, then everyone's going to do it.
Wow. Dream killers everywhere. It's so fascinating to me, right? Because, all the research tells you that it's so expensive to replace that knowledge, right? And it's so difficult. And also, like, people are watching how you treat other people, and they're like, well, if you're going to treat them like garbage, then I certainly, you're not going to do me any good here. When you think about the future of work, right? And we talked about what you think is going to be competitive, but how do you think the workforce is going to evolve? And in particular, we started out the conversation with this, reflection on what's happening in the world, and certainly we've seen more and more of our employees expect our companies to participate and engage on some level. And so I'd just love to get your perspective on, like, how do you see that, or, to the extent that you can share, how do you see that playing out, right?
I see it getting deeper. And there's this talk track of like, and we hear this, right? Oh, why does the company have to talk about stuff like that? That's not work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that anymore. Life doesn't work that way anymore. Work certainly doesn't. So, like work life. Remember how it was for a long time work life balance,
Yeah.
and now we've heard like work life flexibility, and now we're hearing work life integration.
Yeah.
And I think as I think about the future of work, Susan, that integration piece is going to be key. And I'm really energized by the upcoming leaders that I see. And the thing that energizes me the most, I see more authenticity in the upcoming generation of leaders than I ever have before. And I find it really inspiring.
Yeah.
Really inspiring. It's it has to start somewhere, right? So the talk is going to start somewhere. Yes, bring your whole self to work, but we don't really do it. It's like this whole, growth mindset was the big talk track for a long time, and like, oh, make mistakes and we're going to celebrate them.
Yeah.
It was great, but companies really talked the track. They didn't really act the act.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's
because come composition time, they were happy to hold it against you.
Oh yeah, totally. And I think that as I think about the future of work, I think, listen, the talk is important because it has to start somewhere. I hope the pace of change from when we can go from talk to action is going to shorten. And I think that this next gen of leadership that we have coming up is really stepping up to the table.
Yeah.
In terms of that full integration.
Do you, I love, this next generation of leadership. I love that, and that they are very different than and certainly probably what we grew up with. As you look, Sam, at the next generation that's entering the workforce, right? We hear obviously Gen Z, the lower end of the younger end of the millennials. They're not going to stand for companies that aren't, for purpose. But at the end of the day, people need jobs. And I think as we start to see interest rates rising inflation, potential recession, how do you think that is going to shape that younger population's view? Do you think they're going to hold their ground around these are my values, this is what I want, versus even 10 years ago, that these weren't conversations that managers were having with candidates?
No, they definitely were not conversations. Another, my favorite focus group, by the way, is summer interns. You want to know what's going to happen in the future or what's on their mind, just spend an hour with them. I also happen to have an amazing stepdaughter who's graduated from college in a week here, and hearing her and her roommates go through the process of what's important to them, what are they looking for. You are right. The sense of purpose and ESG matters and community matters. It is absolutely important to them. At the end of the day, do people need jobs? Yes. But I'll tell you what, they're going to be really diligent in how they look at them. And our summer interns, I actually sat with them last week as a pre-kickoff to when they will start, and hearing what's important for them. And, work-life integration is important. And guess what? Sometimes we bucket things into generation too much. And I think there's a risk in doing that because it's still mixed. Like let's take work location as one. It's a preference. It's a choice that employees want to be able to have, but it's not defined by generation. It's not like all the older generations and baby boomers want to be in the office 5 days a week. They don't. It's mixed.
Right.
And the kids coming out of the young adults coming out of college right now, they also are mixed.
Yeah.
They also are mixed in that approach. And so it really is choice and the parameters and guardrails that we're putting up to support all of the choices in the right way.
Yeah. Sam, earlier in the conversation, you talked about something that kind of piqued my interest. So I chair a comp committee for a board. I'm on a comp committee for another board. And you said that people are looking to have a different mix around total rewards. What does that mean? Like, tell me more about that. I'm fascinated because I agree with you. But like, what do you see in terms of like how people want to be rewarded?
Yeah. Well, I don't envy you. I think chairing the comp committee or the HRC is probably the most
The new
complicated
audit.
role there is on a board. It's the hardest one there is.
I used to tell people when they join a board, I'm like, join the audit committee because, like, that's like where all the action is. And actually, you learn a lot about the business, but if you want to be in the action, all the action's in comp right now.
It's so true. So, man, we could talk about total rewards for a while because total rewards, in my opinion, is the end-to-end support of the entire employee life cycle. So total rewards is everything from pay, so your base pay, the incentive pay, anything else that you kind of do on top of those pieces. But then it's also total rewards is actually even how do we think about career progression? What are the levels within a company? We don't think of that as a reward, but it's actually a reward because it's the number one reason people are leaving right now is visibility and
exposure
in their progression. The other thing is benefits, right? So, but benefits, I feel like needs to be unpacked, and we almost need a different word lately because table stakes is, health, dental, vision, right? The rest of the benefits are what are you doing to support lots of different categories? And I think this is one of the most innovative spaces that there is in HR right now where we need to progress the most because the demands are, it's gone way beyond just tuition assistance, financial education. We're now into these, what I think is like, I could totally nerd out and get like, we're in cool things like people want sleep support as a benefit. People want elder care support. One thing people don't teach you is how to take care of your aging parent, and it is a huge problem in today's society because people are living longer lives. And how do we handle these? I mean, that's the type of total rewards. Then put on top of that this work-life integration. Like, what's your time off flexibility? Do I have flexibility around where I work, when I work, how I work? That's all of those things are defined in total rewards.
Yeah,
massive space.
That's really fascinating because I agree. I mean, I think employees want to know that you care, but in order to really care about them, you have to know what their needs are. And I think so many companies are just completely disconnected to, particularly when you get into like diverse populations and others.
We've heard, I know we're wrapping up, but like Susan, we've heard even Sam, I mean, some of the companies like menopause support, access to telehealth around not just fertility, but, pregnancy loss, miscarriage, all of the things, particularly for women, that's the life cycle that we go through. And I think that, what's really interesting is everyone has, if they have a choice, to your point, depending on where they're at in their life and the stage of their career, that I think will be a great opportunity to retain and create not only loyal employees, but just terrific performers.
Yeah. So we're, as usual, as we said, the time always goes so fast. Would love to just give you like one more opportunity, Sam, just share any final advice or like pressing things, or you're like, you know what, you guys got to be paying attention to this one thing. What is that?
I think the one thing is just, to narrow it down to one is I would really pay attention to total rewards. One thing I worry about right now is with the rate of attrition in certain skills and capabilities the most, it's really hitting higher in certain job families. But right now, I feel like there's a lack of awareness of what are you leaping to and what are you running from.
Right.
And it could be real easy in today's moment to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, but that salary is 15% higher. And I worry about the understanding of that total reward and quite frankly, even total comp.
Yeah.
And that there's a lack of awareness on what you're getting and what you're giving up. And I really hope, because by the way, I wish people all the best, but I really hope people are looking deep into that and what are you running to, and just be really, really thoughtful of what it is you're trying to get out of that. Because it could turn out in the bad way, but hopefully it's turning out great because it's a new challenge and it's something new and exciting. But
yeah, no, that's great advice. And so look, we appreciate you taking the time to join us on Navigating the Work Compass. It's been great to have you. And the conversation, I'm sure, is like spurred. I've gotten a bunch of pings on my phone already from people who are like, oh my goodness, that was great. That like really made me think about things differently. So thank you. And we hope that all of you all will join us in Navigating the Work Compass, where you can find us on Apple Podcast and Google Podcast. And we are here every week or almost every week to talk about the issues of the day. And Lord knows there's plenty of issues of the day. So we will look forward to seeing you on the next conversation around Navigating the Work Compass.
Thanks, everyone. Sam, we're going to bring you back.
Great.
Yeah.